Well, welcome everybody as you guys are trickling in. We're going to wait a couple more minutes and then we will get started. Um, should be an interesting and fun panel this morning. So looking forward to it. Give it just a couple of minutes.
Is that interesting as in interesting or interesting as in the Chinese apocryphal phrase, which is cursed?
Hey, you live in interesting times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows? Let's see where it goes.
Another one of those things that it turns out nobody ever actually said.
Well, someone obviously said it somewhere. Blamed it on the Chinese.
Yeah, nobody famous said it.
Nobody famous. Does it have to be famous in order to be good?
No.
I guess we could use this time to sort of, like, everybody say the provisions that the opinions expressed here today do not necessarily represent the insert company name, government agency.
Me in 3 months.
I'm actually held accountable for anything that I do. Moment.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point.
Well done. Yeah. We'll leave that there. Although I think Paul and I here do speak for R Street Cyber.
Well, that's fair.
We can be, R Street Cyber can be blamed.
Though I appreciate Maggie's caveat, which is everything I say today, I reserve the right to withdraw in 3 months.
Yes, obviously.
As I change my mind. But yeah, that's okay. That's like learning, right?
Yes.
I learn something new, I change my mind. What do you do?
That's right.
Although I feel like we should adjust
Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Oh,
Such a bad ex-Republican. I mean, come on.
It's you guys. Okay, well, let's get started and then people can continue trickling in. So I'm Tatiana Bolton. I'm the Policy Director for Cybersecurity and Emerging Threats at R Street. And we've got a fantastic panel of friends here today who are experts in the area of cybersecurity. And we are going to duke it out on the Colonial Pipeline incident. And by duke it out, I mean, very friendly discuss our thoughts. Today, we've got Rob Konacki, who is the Whitney Shepherdson Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a big TSA supporter. Nina Collars, who is an associate professor at the U.S. Naval War College, along with a myriad of other fantastic and prestigious appointments. Maggie Morganti, who is a product security researcher at Schneider Electric. And Paul Rosenzweig, a senior fellow for our cybersecurity and emerging threats team here at R Street. Welcome all. And I guess we're going to start with sort of talking about what exactly happened. So Maggie, tell us briefly, Colonial Pipeline incident, what happened?
Yeah, sure. So, and I always feel the need to caveat this in like the past week with like, we still don't totally know. So, anything that I say is, completely incomplete and only based on public reporting, which I feel like is, kind of the foundation that we need to build here before we talk about any of this. And so what has been publicly reported is that there was a enterprise side breach, so not on the OT network, using ransomware from the DarkSide group that shut down some of their enterprise network and affected their billing systems, which in turn caused them to proactively shut down their IT side. So that was done, for billing reasons. They couldn't really run the pipeline if they weren't able to also run it in tandem with the billing side of the house. And then also, and this is again me speculating, but I think they've actually put out some statements regarding this now, but they proactively also shut that down to quarantine the OT side from any potential infections. So, they found out that, hey, our enterprise network has been popped by ransomware, this is bad, and they proactively shut down their operational technology network. And that in turn created, these gas shortages that we've seen while that operations side has been down.
All right. Yes. I personally sat in one of those lines for gas, even though, to be fair, it didn't hit me right away. But there were a lot of people. There were a lot of people impacted, and so a lot of people were asking, like, well, did it hit the actual control systems, right? Like, was this a hack that was so significant that it actually managed to get to a control system, right? The OT side, or was it just on their software that runs their billing and email system and all that? So brings up the question of this air gap. So Nina, talk to us about what's an air gap, how do you air gap, and why don't we trust the air gap?
Wow. So the concept of an air gap, right, is I guess literally what it sounds like, right? So it's making sure that systems that could impact each other aren't touching each other, right? So that could be an actual physical air gap. If you're familiar at all with Countdown to Zero Day, which is Kim Zetter's book, it's an excellent recovery of the Stuxnet attack. Right, there was a whole air gap question there, which is like, how did they get the thumb drive into the actual computers that would affect the reactors themselves. And so that's the air gap, is the notion that, like, as long as these two networks don't actually touch each other, we're okay, right? And so is that true? And so I think, again, working off of Max's very wonderful recovery of all the public data that's available, there's an active question about if there are if the systems don't touch each other, then do we have to worry about it? And the answer is we still have to worry about it, because it's not just the technologies in play here, right? It's the decision processes that happen around it, right? So it's the same thing as saying, like, well, as long as at a college, as long as the registration system doesn't touch the school lunch system, everything's fine. And it's like, no, because somewhere in there are humans that transit between. And so you need to have policies, response plans, regulations that can be in place, because security is done more than just through technology. And so this is the problem. And one of the things that we discovered, and one of the things that DarkSide discovered the hard way, because I don't think that's what they intended. And we can debate that all day long, but I don't think it's what they intended. What they wanted was just to get some money. And what they got was a shutdown pipeline, which, thoughts and prayers go out to those folks, because I'm sure the Russians are also equally as angry. But we need to have that longer talk about what do we do when the decision chain runs through humans, and how do we practice that? How do we make sure that those decisions play out in a way that we can plan or think about? So this is why security is much bigger than just the technologies themselves. It's not just about an air gap. It's not just about not paying the ransomware, although I do want to hear the debate on whether or not we should outlaw paying of ransoms. And so I'll close my mouth on that one. But the air gap is not the problem, right? It's the absence of actual planning mandate, in my view. Actual planning mandates, reporting, certification, making sure people have a response plan and that we're communicating those response plans. Because in this case, we seem to be caught on the back foot.
So true.
Well, I'd also like to, if I can hop in on that. So there's also kind of two things at play here with this whole air gap discussion. So first off, we're talking about a 5,500-mile pipeline. So during an active breach, the confidence that even if you think you have an air gap in place, that nowhere along your entire infrastructure that has in any way been compromised for the sake of convenience, that's a bold risk to take, to leave things up and say, oh yeah, we totally trust that over the course of all of this operational technology spread across, almost 6,000 miles of pipeline, during an active breach, at no point we can say with 100% confidence has an engineer ever, for convenience, plugged something into something that they shouldn't have and rendered that air gap essentially useless. And the other thing at play here is that it may not matter. So even if that air gap was 100%, if they touch something like billing or automated emissions reporting in certain states, if those things go down, regardless of if your OT is safe, quarantined, all of those things, you still probably have to shut your operations down. I think in California, I was just discussing with some people yesterday, the EPA actually regulates that if you lose your ability to automatically report your emissions for something like that, they have to shut OT down. So they could have the best air gap in the world, And there are certain systems on the IT side that if they are impacted in a way that, they have to be taken down or taken down by ransomware, OT is a collateral victim at that point.
I like to think, though, that government's nimble enough to waive some of those collateral requirements. I mean, I hear you about California, but I like to think that if this was a problem in California, that the California EPA, it might take them a little bit of time to get their thumbs out of their mouths, but they would rightly see them. I mean, just as the Biden administration, for example, waived trucking limitations up and down the East Coast when the pipeline went down. It takes a while, but I see that. I mean, the rest of what you said, I agree with completely, but I see the legal jeopardy as real, but less significant.
Yeah, and I would hope that coming out of this, we get that sort of out of the way from a policy standpoint ahead of time now, so that we're not trying to do that during the next active breach on the fly.
That's a good point.
Yeah, great point. Well, so in this case, we're not talking EPA. In this case, we're talking TSA. And that brings us to Rob Kinetic, who loves TSA. Oh, defend it, Rob, defend it.
Man, where do you want to begin with the love TSA? First, I don't understand the hatred for TSA.
Come on.
I don't know if are
Does
Paul and I
anyone
the only people who remember
understand the
flying
hatred for
before TSA? Like, it wasn't like aviation security was all that great. Clearly it wasn't, or all that fun to go through when the airlines ran it. So I don't even understand the argument that, like, oh, TSA is horrible at their main mission of aviation security.
They had like 6 cyber people, 6.
Okay, but let's put that. All right. So but most people are just reacting to, like, I don't like TSA checkpoints, therefore they shouldn't do pipeline security. That's a dumb argument, right? That is nothing to do. Nobody, definitely not me, and nobody that I've heard is saying what we need is TSA to set up the equivalent of checkpoints at pipelines. Nobody's saying that, right?
But what we need is TSA to set up checkpoints and pipelines.
There she
Right.
is.
You just have to do it.
You did it.
Asking for it. Go ahead.
The argument
Sorry.
I've made is that TSA has the authority to regulate pipelines. They've got the authority and nobody else does for security. So we can take a bill and we can put it on the Hill and we can say, okay, let's move this authority to FERC, or let's create something else within the Department of Energy, or let's bring it back to DOT, or let's give it to the EPA. Good luck with that. That's what, at least a year-long process. It will probably, who here has worked on the Hill? I never have, but this would be subject to, all right. So this would be subject to a lot of lobbying and to the filibuster, right? So you'd have to overcome the filibuster. You'd have to get a whole bunch of Republicans and all the Dems to come together and say, yes, we actually think that we should move this authority from TSA somewhere else. That's not going to happen. And if it was, it would be a waste of a year. So you're much better off saying, look, there's nothing at TSA. There's 6 people or 34, but that's on the voluntary side. You need to build something new. You need to bring in people. You need to go hire Maggie, make her come out of the private sector, come in and build a regulatory regime. There are people that you can bring in from Idaho National Labs. There are some good people in ICS, right? There's knowledge in the federal government. There's knowledge in NIST. You can build the team to do this. You don't need to say, we're going to pull inspectors off the line at Dulles and make them TSA pipeline inspectors. I mean, that's not, I think, what anybody's proposing.
No, and I don't
Thank God for that.
Thank God. But I don't think anybody's proposing that. I think, like, my biggest concern is, like, and I don't disagree with you. I completely agree that we're not going to, should we suggest that we switch SSAs, because what you're doing, honestly, is just shuffling deck chairs, right? It's going from one under-resourced SSA for the pipelines to a different under-resourced SSA for the pipelines. Like, the majority of them don't have the staffing and the resources. It's not just TSA, right? Like, look at water. Look at, like, all, you know what I mean? Like, the chemical sector, how well cyber staffed are they? Like, not so much. So my biggest thing is, we have to think about, like, the broad stroke cybersecurity planning, right? So, which is why I'm such a big proponent of the NCD and CISA getting sort of more staffed and resourced, so they can coordinate all this better. promulgate better sort of policies, regulations, and work in that direction. I'm a big opponent of having specific SSAs, somewhat like energy and treasury, which have sort of their own versions of cybersecurity policies, and then they get their own like sensors. They try to do their own sort of systems within systems, and I'm not sure we're going anywhere good with that.
So, I actually have some sympathy for Rob's idea. He's absolutely right that if we try to move it to another agency, it won't happen, and we'll spend the next 2 years fighting about that. The problem is really that what you're suggesting is the creation out of whole cloth of a new regulatory regime. And that by itself is a 5-year process at a minimum. The nearest equivalent I can think of in DHS would be the CFAT structure, the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Systems, which are just beginning to have a cybersecurity overlay on top of them in the last couple of years, where they've started to set out standards. The challenge really is that the reason the pipeline is in TSA is the same reason that rail is in TSA and subways are in TSA and airlines are in TSA. But the entire mindset at the time was about physical security, was about terrorists blowing stuff up, putting a nuke on a pipeline or something like that. And it was thought that that expertise was useful. If we're going to try and transition to a different regulatory regime that is focused on non-kinetic threats, TSA is not the right place. You'd have to build it from scratch. If I were to really, take your idea to heart and say we need to do something governmental and regulatory now because of this, I would say that you take TSA's authorities, you marry them to the expertise that exists in CISA and possibly NSA, right? Get some of those guys to come in on detail and see if you can't do something like that. But if you do it from the ground up in TSA, it ain't going to work. It ain't going to work because they really are mostly people who, to be nice about it, they're people who are focused on methodologies for physical screening that simply are not impactful. And then the second point I would make is, having said all that, I have some doubt about the overall project, simply because the size and scale of what you're asking them to do is really so large. I mean, Maggie was making the point, it's a 5,000-mile pipeline that's Colonial, and that's just one of, I tried to do some Googling before this to be able to talk, several dozen pipelines of equal size and scale and scope. So the problem is going to be immense. Anyway, my thoughts, not TSA by itself, please.
Oh yeah, no, look, I think I've been working on a line, right? You regulate with the authorities you have, not the authorities you want, right?
Thank you.
That's all the argument I'm making here. These are the authorities we have. Let's go use them. We're realizing that we're in an emergency situation, right? We'll get to the ransomware aspects of this later, but I mean, there is an argument to be made that these ransomware operators have exposed the poor security of at least one pipeline. Now, the next question is, what's the security of those other pipelines? So the first things I think you want a regulatory regime to do isn't to specify you will do this and you will have an air gap in this way and you'll disconnect these systems and all that. No, the first thing you want to do is mandate reporting of incidents, right? If this hadn't shut down the pipeline, we never would have found out about it at all, right? Colonial isn't even a public company. So they wouldn't have even been able to say, oh, is it a material risk? Do we have to report it to our shareholders publicly? Right? If it hadn't shut down, we never would have heard about this at all. So the first thing you do under a regulatory regime, which you could do really quickly, is say, you're going to report incidents. You have an incident, here are the standards. We've got 3 or 4 good examples of what those look like. That's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is you say, okay, you're going to have to report incidents to us, and we're going to come in and do one hell of an investigation into what happened, right? What I really love about the American Petroleum Institute is they said, until we fully understand what happened with Colonial Pipeline, discussion of regulation is premature. When are we going to figure out what fully happened at Colonial Pipeline? Anybody want to answer that question?
After President Biden sets up his cybersecurity incident review board.
And it uses TSA's authority to force the investigation.
Exactly.
Otherwise, there's no reason that Colonial Pipeline will ever let anybody figure out what happened there.
So I totally agree with Rob, right? So like one, right, mandate reporting for certain critical infrastructure providers, right? Regardless of your private sector, right? So you have mandated reporting, right? In maybe an independent review committee, right, that's qualified to go in and have a look at it, not just let my incident responder that I have on retainer do that for me, right, but sort of have some transparency. I'm going to bring up another weird, sort of agency that no one really thinks about. The Coast Guard is weirdly interesting and smart in this space. Go ahead and laugh; it's fine.
I know.
Right? So the Coast
I'm
Guard
going to start singing Alexander Hamilton.
right?
I mean, come on.
We're just talking about all the DHS gang, it's like, this is back to my policy days when it was like DHS would gather the cyber people and it was like TSA and Secret Service and CISA and Coast Guard. It was like the weirdest group of agencies, and you're like, all of you under DHS, huh?
Here's why, right? So here's what's interesting about what the Coast Guard does. There are other entities that do it too, but Coast Guard's just a really an awesome example. One, Colonial isn't just a pipeline. They're in the ports, they're all over the place, right? Two, no matter how much we want to say, well, we can mandate and regulate, the reality is this is a come at it from both ends of the spectrum. The mandate isn't going to solve a problem that the private sector wants to work around, right? So you have to sort of at some level agree at a standard. And what's interesting about the way Coast Guard has always done shop, right? They're partially law enforcement, but most of what they do is socialize and create expectations and standards that we all take as effectively, this is how shop should be done. And they managed to do it not just within our borders or just 10 miles off of our coast, but sort of come to an understanding across the entirety of the industry, right? So that we can at least bootstrap this, because if we're just worried about domestic pipelines, that's not, we're thinking again, in Paul's words, right? We're thinking purely of physical and not of the way the whole system works. And so we need to think of this at a higher level and start getting all of the stakeholders on board and discussing how do we do this in a way that's realistic, because we can't just law it, right? There ought to be a law, but there needs to be a lot more work, right? A lot more agency cooperation, but a lot more collaboration just globally with all the private sector actors. Sorry, that's my 2 cents. It's why I think it's what I love about the Coast Guard's perspective. I'm not saying make the Coast Guard do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that perspective of seeing private sector actors, global law, all the different agencies together.
Well, and also I think to that point exactly, this idea that TSA is only physical, so we need someone else to do it, is incredibly short-sighted, because that says by nature we're fine with essentially skipping building in cyber expertise into the agency that runs airports, ports, and pipelines and everything else that TSA does. And I know that it didn't really seem to get a lot of public attention because it was happening at the same time as Maersk. But when I was at FireEye, we did a ton of reporting on airports internationally that were getting popped by ransomware. And luckily, it didn't really affect their operations much, but that doesn't mean that it can't. And so I think this is also going to have sort of a lot of add-on benefits if we can really use Colonial as a step stool to say, hey, no, we need to get this into TSA. You no longer are okay just being a physical terrorism threats sort of organization.
I just love that Maggie is making these straight face points in support of this idea, while in the private chat over here making jokes about pipeline global entry pre-check. And this malware sample was recently recovered by a TSA agent in Houston with signs along the pipeline. So this is an eminently mockable idea, even by those who support it. But yeah, I do think, we are onto something.
I didn't say I wouldn't also make jokes. That was never promised.
We never
when the write themselves, you got them flow.
But okay, so I'm gonna go a bit pessimistic here, but we have had massive breaches before, right? We just had SolarWinds, and still we just I don't know what it's going to take for sort of the support that we need for the resourcing and the like people that we need for cybersecurity. Like I just like we had this pipeline hack and we're talking about how to like fix pipelines. Agreed. And like to Paul's point, I think Maggie made the point, it's not just pipelines. So like we've got 16 critical infrastructure sectors. All of them need better cybersecurity, even finance and energy. You know what I mean? Like the regulations there, I would say like probably don't protect, 100%. So I mean, show of hands, who thinks the national data breach notification law is going to pass? Seriously? Nobody? I'm a little just sad. Okay, but I guess I started pessimistic, so now I'm just flipping on myself. But like, damn.
It might for public sector entities, government entities and or publicly traded entities, but the chances of there being a mandatory data breach reporting for private sector people like Colonial Pipeline, really slim.
Well, when we first started doing this for energy sector, there was a reporting mandate and the response was crickets. I mean,
Yep.
Mike Asante wrote a letter to, a lot of big public utilities, was basically like, I see you. There's no way that this silence is accurate. Like, get your crap together. And, even once that there was, a mandatory reporting mechanism in place, actually enforcing it is a lift.
Yeah.
This is why I'm always echoing Jim Lewis on this, right? Use your existing regulatory authority. You have more than you think, right? And so we can do this with the electric sector. We can do this with pipelines. We could do this with almost any form of transportation. Pretty heavy flex in the recent executive order saying, essentially, if you're a software provider, a hardware provider, a cybersecurity provider to the federal government, you're going to report incidents to us that you experience, or you're not going to contract with the federal government, choose, right? And we may see some companies be like, okay, I'm going to exit the federal market. I think most are going to be like, oh, okay, I'll report incidents to you. So there are ways that we can get to this incident reporting. And there are ways that we can get better answers to the security through contracting or through existing regulation. I think that's one of the most important things that this administration can do. And that's why I think the Cyber Safety Review Board is so important, because it's at least a beginning of figuring out, look, here's what this would look like. Do we actually have the authorities to do it? What would the authorities be that we need to actually make this happen? And then we can answer the questions that we're all stumbling around of, okay, why did the Colonial Pipeline actually have to be taken offline, right? What data was moving? What is a better control set, right? And this is what we're missing from the space.
Yeah. I actually loved your I loved your quote from your piece. No thoughts, prayers, or information sharing is going to fix this problem. That was good. But so this is sort of like a cyber NTSB, right? But there's still a wide debate about whether that's going to be effective.
Well, it can be. I mean, the EO proposal is a good one, but it's set up under existing authorities. It's one of the examples that's a counter to Rob's, you take the authorities you have. It's a FACA really, so it doesn't have, for example, mandatory authority, except to the extent that that mandatory authority exists elsewhere in the federal government, and the federal government agrees to use it on behalf of a FACA, which would be really strange and unusual. So it's going, I think that if it were to be effective, it would have to be institutionalized by legislation, much as the Bureau of Cyber Statistics to be effective would need institutionalization by legislation. And those are, Rob made the point earlier about legislation generally, and he's right. In today's environment, any forward-going steps that you want to take that require legislation are probably not likely to happen in the near future. That even in a bipartisan manner, place like cybersecurity, it just the hill is so poisoned right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. time has come. All right, ransomware. Let's talk about it. Nina, you go.
No, I mean,
Hey, I'm kidding. No
but
one
no,
likes.
so here's the, I mean, one, ransomware continues to be like one of the biggest problems for the private sector, right? It's a great monetization scheme that, in conjunction with how you can get those payouts, is really like, how do we get our arms wrapped around this? One of the most hotly contested, which sometimes can be equated with horrible idea, components of ransomware, right, is the conversation about, well, maybe we should just make it illegal for companies to pay the ransom. Look on Meg's face. So the question is, okay, so why don't we just air it out, right? Like, what would make, making it illegal for critical infrastructure providers? Let's make it nice and simple, right? The SICI, the systemically important critical infrastructure people. What about that mechanism doesn't work? What happens if you say, all right, it's illegal to pay the ransom? What happens?
Well, I mean, technically it is illegal now, but clearly that's like not stopping anybody. Like, you got the whole world like looking at you. What are you gonna do, right? Like, if half the fuel to the East Coast is shut off and it's your company, and clearly, like, it's like a giant laser beam of US focus is on you personally, right, as the leader of this company. Like, what are you going to do? And to be fair, I think they paid it in like a day. They paid it before they even announced they had the hack.
Yep. No, I mean, this gets really difficult because so I mean, I kind of want to walk through two kind of separate scenarios here. So the first one is, say you have a local water utility that has absolutely no cyber resources, and they get popped because they have no cyber resources or expertise. They didn't have backups. They didn't have valid backups to bring things back online quickly, and you're going to make it illegal for them to find a way to do that and leave their customer base impacted for X number of days. Hopefully it's only days until that gets brought back up online, versus they could technically pay it and resume service and keep going and then deal with that shortcoming after the fact. The other one is, I think making it illegal tends to kind of skim over this reality that there are threat actors now that are going straight for your backups when they get in your system. They're not launching the ransomware initially. They are getting in the system, they're moving around laterally, they're finding where your backups are if they can get to them, and also infecting those. So even if you had sort of this best practices in place to have really good backups, if you can't also get those when you need them, all of a sudden, in an incident like Colonial, like, the impact on that could be weeks to bring things back online. And so I know that there are things you can do with that. And again, we're going to just come full circle to air gap here, that you can air gap your backups off site, but then you're relying on an air gap to do this. And I think that we can strongly discourage it, or even mandate that it's technically illegal. But to Paul's point earlier about things like the EPA mandates needing to be flexible, I think there does need to be some leeway in that for active breaches that are affecting public safety, public health, if these things stay down for a prolonged period of time, versus just paying them, getting it back up, and then maybe fining the hell out of the company for not having best practices in place to begin with that caused those. And that's the end of my rant on that.
Again, nobody's proposing TSA, have inspectors at pipelines looking at every packet.
But I like the signs, though. We should definitely have the sign.
Got lots of signs. I'm Janet Napolitano, right? That's okay. No, nobody is proposing for ransomware that if you pay a ransom, you should be summarily shot at dawn for doing so, right? I mean, there are gradations here, right? Okay, it's illegal to pay ransomware, and you will have to pay a fine if you do that. Maybe it's $10,000, as New York State lawmakers proposed. last week. Maybe
If you're willing to hold on, but if you're willing to pay
We're gonna
$5
pay
million,
$5
why would you
million,
not be willing to
the
pay
10,000 is like, here, just add it to my
no, I don't
wiring
think
fee,
necessarily about the
right?
money.
Like, we
It's
just
a
send it all
couple
to one
things.
location. Yeah.
Right. I had to go to Stuart Baker on this one because he's the only real lawyer I know. Everybody I know who has law degrees doesn't actually ever practice law anymore, right? But so, if you are committing a crime, that's not something that, lawyers can take part in, right? You risk your law license if you do that. And so all this sort of cover that is used in these incidents under the law would disappear, right? And so that would be good. And then the second thing that I think it would do is it would really start aligning the insurance industry actually towards preventing cyber incidents rather than just paying ransoms, right? Right now, like, what are cyber insurance policies for? Paying ransoms. What do they want you to do? Pay the ransom. Why? Because paying for you to recover your systems costs a lot more.
Yeah.
Right? And so if it's, look, you got to pay out of your own pocket. If you choose to pay the ransom, maybe that's fine. You're going to have to pay a fine on that. You're going to lose your legal cover. And, we're not going to pay. That'd be a reasonable proposal.
So I want to take this in a slightly different direction. First off, I think that we will increasingly see efforts to make it difficult to pay ransom. AXA, the insurer in France, just announced that it would no longer cover ransomware payments for its French clients. So no insurance, no money, no payment. That's pretty. The Treasury announcement of enhanced enforcement of OFAC lists against prohibited parties will also be a challenge. But you're never going to be able to outlaw payments of ransom any more than we've succeeded in outlawing the black market, right? For goods and services, Gucci or electronics. So long as there's a profit in it, there'll be people who conduct it, and so long as it's cheaper to pay the ransom than it is to fight, there'll be people who want to pay it with or without the legal protection. And I agree that criminalizing it will take the lawyers out of it, but that'll, in some ways, that's all. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers, right? But I think that the real answer is that you have to find a way to make the business model no longer function. Right? There are three things I think that are driving ransomware right now. The first is Russia protects them. And that's a diplomatic problem for President Biden to work on outside of our zone. There's inadequate security. That's something that we all can work on. We can talk to Colonial and tell them how to be better. But the real driver is the bad guys make money. They make lots and lots of money. They make $5 million for a couple of emails. And to my mind, we need to get at that. So I actually think that the real question to ask is not outlawing ransomware, but outlawing cryptocurrency.
There it is.
I wondered if he was going there.
Yeah,
And
why there is, I say this mostly to provoke. So everybody who's listening, please don't go and write that Rosenzweig is totally serious about this. But I'm semi-serious about it in the same way that Kanaki is semi-serious about the TSA. There isn't a lot of upside social utility to cryptocurrency. It has some value as a storehouse of money and some value for energizing anonymous exchanges that ought to be outside the purview of governments, but mostly it's speculative and mostly it's criminal. And I think that is a shame. And I think I got to talk to some of my tech friends. You went to talk to your lawyer friends, Rob. I went to talk to my friend. We can poison Bitcoin and destroy it if we want to. And if no Bitcoin, no ransom.
I wonder.
No ransom, no ransomware.
I wonder if this is why, it's recently massively tanked, because there have been these, thoughts flying around that, this is mostly negative.
So, it's going down as we speak. So I think Paul is showing
Paul is actively affecting
the Elon effect, the Rosenzweig effect on Bitcoin. That's right.
Only here at our street events. Okay, go.
So what I think I hear Rob arguing is that if a company pays a ransom, they sort of get added to a cyber no-fly list.
Oh, that was just.
Ouch.
Sorry, I
Ouch.
Oh, God, you're good. Okay.
You need to follow Maggie at a minimum because her dad jokes are awesome on Twitter.
So Tatiana, I don't know if you noticed, but there's at least one hand raised. I don't know. Guillermo, we can't allow people to speak, I think, on this. So what you have to do is put it into the Q&A or the chat, and then we can answer the question. But the way these are set up, we don't have the capacity to add other people for live questions.
So
Yeah.
while we're waiting for Guillermo to type frantically question, so is it, as of what, was it 7 or 8 years ago, the FBI was the largest holder of Bitcoin currency when it took over Silk Road. Is that still true? Anyone trivia?
I have read recently in a piece that I'm reviewing that they have enough Bitcoin that if they let it out, they could move the market, which would be another way to destroy the market.
All right. So,
That, at least that's the suggestion in the paper.
So I want to throw something out here, right? On the other side of this, right? You know, in these sort of weird connections, right? My wife's college roommate's husband has turned out to be this guy on Twitter, Andy Edstrom, that is like this big Bitcoin proponent out on the West Coast. And he's always like poking at me with the point that Bitcoin makes it possible for these ransomware operators to exact a cost to effectively regulate bad cybersecurity by making the people who have the bad cybersecurity pay this cost through Bitcoin. And like, if they weren't out there, we never would have known how bad the security at Colonial Pipeline is. And so like, they're providing, you know, what may actually be, you know, I have to cross myself when I say this, right? The wake-up call that Phil Reiniger has said we're never going to get.
Yeah, the exact same thing is true about bank robbers. They are just identifying the weak banks with poor security,
Yes.
right?
A community service.
Yeah, that is the biggest piece of
the day. If TSA actually does this stupid idea of regulating for cybersecurity after this,
we'll never know. We'll never know where the vulnerabilities are.
Thank you, Russian cyber criminals, for
selfishly, right? This from a DoD perspective,
like message would actually kind of be true. Like
super thankful, right? That this is all criminality, right? From a DoD perspective, like it just makes wow. Thanks for revealing how jacked up that is. The reality is that's right. That there's an infinite set of vulnerabilities. But yes, I mean I appreciate it. I also appreciate, and we should also appreciate just the sort of geopolitical pressure that got thrown on Russia because of this, which is whether or not those actors were independent of Russian policy. It shined a light on the Russians that you know, by all sort of open source understandings, right? Putin had to respond to, literally got brought to the table. Our administration got brought to the table to have this conversation over a criminal offense. And that was a pretty interesting thing to watch.
Certainly made him uncomfortable. That, by the way, brings us to, well, I guess let's stay on the topic of Russia. Obviously you know, this wasn't a state-sponsored attack, but, you know, they are working, we know that they're working out of areas, right, which allow them to function in their space. Right, they're not in countries that are strictly like enforcing, right? So what's Russia's role in this? Like how much do you blame Russia for allowing these criminal gangs to operate in their space?
Are there really like no ransomware operators in like South America that are hitting businesses in Moscow with ransomware? Like, is this just
I'm sure.
a Russia out thing? Like,
okay, it's not just Russia. Fine.
No, I don't. I mean, that's a serious question.
Actually, that's a great question for which we have absolutely no data. Of course, nobody in Russia would ever admit to the failure because they'd be dead a week later. But that having been said, I share your instinct, Rob, that it cannot be the case that the only effective criminal ransomware gangs are in Russia. If anywhere else, there's probably some operating here in America, maybe.
Maggie,
Yeah.
is that why you're quiet? You're carrying out a campaign right now against Russian critical infrastructure?
Listen, if you had horses with vet bills, you'd understand.
So Tatiana, there is a question from Guillermo
Yes,
then
all
another
right.
one from Tara Hairston.
All right, so so Guillermo Christensen says, as a lawyer actually practicing in cyberspace currently, good on you, because we don't see that much. Dealing with 3 ransomware incidents, I'd suggest doing more to go after threat actors. Also, as a former CIA background, but the legal issues are pretty easy for the most part. He's only had 1 incident where we could not pay because of OFAC. So we need to do more to hunt them down and deny the battle space. Thoughts? Agreed?
Well, all I want to say is, Guillermo, you're not on Twitter, so I couldn't ask you live that question, and that's why I had to go to Stuart Baker and not you. But I think your points are all good, right? I mean, I think the question is, right, at what point does ransomware, taking the other side of this argument, become that clear and present danger to the United States in and of itself, right? Yes, I'm channeling Tom Clancy here, right? Is this like the drug cartels in clear and present danger? And the argument, I think, when you're causing the kind of physical effect that we saw in the pipeline is probably yes, right? So the idea of saying, look, they're just kind of the regulators that, TSA is not, exacting a price and exposing bad security. Well, you're a problem in and of yourself at this point. And with all this money going in, the capabilities growing, it's becoming more and more dangerous. So, at what point do we start doing things like saying, okay, it's time for some extraordinary rendition of ransomware actors operating out of Russia, right? Do we do that once, or does that bring us into a whole world where, nobody's going to want to work for NSA or Cyber Command if we go in that direction? I don't know, but I do think we need some trials of some ransomware operators to say, hey, this has gone far beyond taking $350 from grandma for locking up her kids' photos.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious what he means by hunt them down, because I have a sense in which those who want to see the pipeline as a through the prism of LOAC think of hunt them down as actually like drone them, right, or send the special operations forces out to find them. If you mean, however, that we need to do more to hunt them down, as in bring them to justice, even that's really problematic, given what I think is the reluctance of the Russian government to assist. Now, that might change, especially with respect to this group. If the president pressed on them, say, bring me the heads of the DarkSide 10, Putin might actually produce them. But that's only because they had such a, as Nina said originally, such an effect well beyond what they probably anticipated they were going to have.
Well, and LOAC's so interesting here because there's like a fun little line in there that if you're looking at it from a sabotage standpoint versus, kind of a traditional kinetic attack, which I always argue that I think that these sort of incidents fall more under sabotage than like, cyber actual attack sort of instances. And for the people responsible for sabotage, they are able to lose their kind of protected combatant status under LOAC if they are operating behind enemy lines, which gets really interesting in cybersecurity because when that was written, that didn't in any way have foresight into the future that there would be this digital domain. So, and I'd be interested in any lawyers in the chat if you have case law example on this, but I haven't seen solid case law saying we have established what we mean by behind enemy lines is that, someone in the United States on our soil, dropping bad USB sticks sort of thing, or is that just getting into the physical or into the
that's actually an interesting question because there is a real debate in the LOAC area about that. For example, the War Powers Reporting Act is written about the introduction of troops into hostile environments, and there's a long-standing, and that's what generates the notification requirement. And there's a long-standing debate about whether or not cyber troops, can meet that. I see that in the Q&A, Guillermo says hack their RAAS and their Bitcoin wallets, which that I'm totally for. If you zero out the profit, you zero out that's another way of attacking the business model that's a little less extreme than outlawing Bitcoin altogether.
So I want to keep amplifying. I mean, I know we came together to talk about, or at least our street's corner of this is firmly U.S. domestic policy, in Rob's too, and that's like there's work to be done everywhere. But Lauren's question in the chat about whether or not this is problematic for the OEWG. So essentially, what does this mean in terms of global norms and international law? That this appears to sort of, has this irritated Russia's status as being one of the, I'm not going to laugh while saying this, Russia's status as fostering global norms in cyberspace. Although, let's be honest, right? Like the people who actually end up fostering norms often are the worst offenders because they're finding that lower limit for behavior for you, right? So like everyone can pretend to act like a saint, but it's really the sinner that sets the norm. So
it's like the thank you bank robbers. Again, we're going back to this. That this is where
all the references. So the question is like, do we think, and to Lauren's point, like does upset Russia's standing, whatever there is there? Two, like what is this? Does this mean we're finding a norm? That everybody is horrified. That DarkSide is like, oop, just kidding. Sorry, next time we're totally gonna do the front side research before we go doing something like this.
Oh God, their response was amazing. Their response was hilarious. Oh, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. And then, oops, like we didn't actually mean to like turn off the gas to like half of America. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
So what does this mean for norms? Like now is there a demonstrative enough case here that we're going to start to see countries go, yeah, I remember how that, right? Because you need this kind of premier case study, like the MERS, like not Petra, right? You need this premier case study that everyone can go, I remember that. Yeah, that was crap. We're not doing that. We can't let the criminal overlap with the geopolitical because it messes up how we do shop. I don't know. Do we think that's possible?
Right, but I mean, let's unpack it. They were like, we're so sorry, but they still took the ransom payment.
Yeah.
They didn't return it, right?
Sure.
Their encryption software didn't work faster than the backup and restore function, which is kind of amazing. Like they're really not, they really weren't in a position to be going after an enterprise of this scale, apparently, right? Just from their sort of customer service perspective. And so, I mean, I think that's more of the
service of ransomware gangs.
I don't think we're going to see the Russians say, oh, we arrested these 3 guys and, we shot them summarily at dawn, right? And like, I don't think we're going to see that. We're certainly not going to see them turn them over to the FBI.
No, but I think you're going to see criminal, right? Organized crime has a way of trying it. It doesn't want to irritate the host that it's in, right? And so if there starts to be stronger enforcement within countries where these people hang out, you may see diminishment or at least the clear establishment of, hey, we don't do that, right? That's not a thing we do anymore. We used to back when it was the wild, wild west, but it turns out that it sort of pisses off other people's foreign policy. Now, you would have to have countries do it, but we don't have it like this sort of notion that we need to be punching back in cyberspace, right? Okay. I'm not sure, right? Hit him in the wallet, to Paul's point, like hit him in the wallet. But I mean, if you can't do that, then you have to find a way to make the host country, insofar as it has any degree of control, not be a place that's hospitable to that kind of behavior, which means we can automatically exclude North Korea, right? They're going to not regulate that. But,
there's also, I mean, there was one real fun incident. I don't know if any of you noticed that kind of supports your point, Nina, which is there is an admin who runs the DarkSide Bitcoin payment wallet structure. And there was a complaint from one of DarkSide's subsidiaries that they hadn't gotten their share of the DarkSide payment. And the admin told DarkSide to pay the guy, or they put DarkSide off of the network. And that was that there is a regulatory structure. It's basically ad law that, and I suspect that behind the scenes, that same admin said, and don't do this ever again, please. or we're going to absolutely destroy you.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. All right. We got like 5 minutes, so we're gonna end on a fun little lightning round of worst takes on this incident. Okay. And we're not gonna talk about when I was like, oh, it's probably a state-sponsored attack. I'm not gonna talk about that. Okay, go.
All right, the conspiracy theory I followed that I've been watching is the linking of the ransomware attack on Colonial to the election fraud, and the fact that those groups are now, you know, it's part of an overall picture of why the election was fraudulent, has something to do with the Colonial Pipeline attack.
Okay. Yeah.
So do you mean besides the take that we should give this to TSA? Sorry, had to, Rob. Well, I mean, was it that funny, Nina, that you had to go out of this screen? Sorry.
All with love, Rob. All with love.
Mine was the suggestion on Russia Today that it was actually the U.S. government hacking the pipeline itself and blaming Russia for it.
Amazing.
I actually think one of the Cook brothers had a change of heart on global warming and shut down the pipeline. And then the other brother wrestled control back and is blaming it on ransomware. And that's what actually happened.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Mine is twofold. The actual hot take that I saw was that they got in, the infection vector was the OT network, and they used that to hack through the DMZ to get to the IT network, didn't touch anything on OT, and that's how they actually got in, not a phishing email. But the second part, and this is a little bit of a soapbox, is I've seen, and this is what I kind of actually consider as the worst hot take, is I've seen a lot of the security community looking at Colonial and going, how could they be so stupid? Look at the TTPs that FireEye put out. How could they be so stupid? And it's this very like self-important grandstanding. And it's like, if they failed, and if the public's knowledge of like if the public's reaction to this is something like, oh, where was the air gap? Like, we are kind of culpable for some of those bad takes, because we've clearly been failing from an education perspective. If people who've been reporting in our community for years look at this and think, oh, the air gap was the answer. Like, who was talking to that person? Who was like educating them? Because at that point, that's not their fault. That is whoever they got that from, that was supposed to be helping them understand these things better. So I think the real bad hot take is that the security community is the genius that's going to save the day. And I don't know that that's actually going to happen if everyone kind of keeps standing on Twitter and not rolling up their sleeves.
+1 and 2 to you, Maggie. I mean, I feel like we don't nearly have enough education. We don't have enough metrics, Paul, to the Bureau of Cyber Statistics that you are a huge proponent of, as am I. And I feel like we just need a change of culture. Like, we need to acknowledge that almost anyone can be hacked with enough time and resources, right? Like, anyone can be hacked. And so it's not that they were stupid. It's that most likely a bunch, if you did a straight up audit of like everyone, I bet you every single company is doing something wrong. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's really easy to mess up one like system configuration, right? One little piece of that configuration, and then you're vulnerable. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody very much. I appreciate you all joining us today. This was a fascinating discussion. Thanks everybody who tuned in to watch. This is recorded, and so it'll go up on YouTube to share with all your friends. And we will see you all again soon. Thanks all.
Thank you guys.